Apologies. So basically, this afternoon we are really very pleased to have gathered a group of distinguished experts that we're going to talk about de-escalating the Russian-Ukraine conflict think tank perspective from China, Russia, and Europe. So as we know that a month has actually passed into the Ukraine crisis, casualties continue to mount, and of course, also the buildings and fields shattering, bombshell, and millions of refugees flee home. And so geopolitical tension in Ukraine are already affecting the global economy with a massive fallout of sanctions on the stability of global finance, energy supplies, transportation, and supply chains. So as we can see that it's really affecting all of us. Of course, we just see the three summits being held in Brussels over the weekend, the NATO summit, G7 summit, and the Council summit. And also we know that France is being holding a rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union. And its ally, Germany, has been engaged in shuttle diplomacy. We see President Macron and Chancellor Scholz trying to de-escalate the Ukraine crisis. Of course, President Xi speaking at a virtual meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron and the German Chancellor Scholz early this March, and said, like to work with the international community and to support the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine and to solve the crisis. So despite the multiple efforts, the situation in Ukraine remains uncertain, and moving forward, it's really a diplomatic resolution.
Recording in progress.
Still needed on the horizon. So what role can all the countries and also China play in invoking a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine? Which proposal suggested from the think tank circles in China and Europe that would most likely to drive multilateral action towards peace talks between Moscow and Kiev. So looking forward, actually, this really a topic of our discussion today. So CCG is very pleased to hold this webinar featuring perspectives from Chinese and European think tanks on resolving the Ukraine crisis. So we hope that we can have really a good discussion on that. So in the context of Biden's visit to Brussels, and also upcoming EU-China summit, our webinar is really to seek the think tank wisdom and the think tank advices from both Europe and China to see how we can advance the practical solutions with this going conflict. So today we are really very pleased to be joined by a very distinguished panelist. I'll start and introduce them in the order of alphabetic order. So we have Inanora Tafel Abrosati. He's a research fellow, Russian, Caucasus, and Central Asia Center at the Italian Institute for International Political Studies, ISPI. So thank you for joining us. You know that, yes. And also we have John Christopher Barr. He's the founder and CEO of the Global Compass. Also presenting, I believe you are in Paris, and also we have Emmanuel. Is a fellow of the Carnegie Moscow Center. Very pleased to have you. And of course, last but not least, we have Fabian Zulik. He's the CEO of the European Policy Center, which we have cooperated since he has previous cooperate in the past. So let's start the discussion, and we'll have let's have a 5-6 minutes of each expert. We can go one round, and then we can come back for further discussions of this, how we can facing this crisis, and how we can reach consensus, and what are the think tank proposals and the solutions for this crisis. So probably let's start with backward. Maybe we have Fabian, the CEO of the European Policy Center. Why don't you start first and give us some European perspective? Fabian, please.
Thank you very much for inviting me and to discuss this very important topic, which clearly is on everyone's mind at the moment. And maybe I'll try to put it into what I see as the broader European context before coming to what might be the next steps, because I think it's important to be clear about where we see this. And from our perspective, the moment the war of aggression started, the moment the tanks of Russia rolled across the border, it's clear that this is a watershed moment in European history. Things are not the same after this moment as they were before. This will have a profound impact on the way the European Union does policy. And we've already seen that within the short time, within 5 weeks, the response of the European Union was, I would say, quick. It was decisive, and it was united. Not what necessarily would have been expected from the beginning. And it shows that this is seen very differently by Europe's capitals and by Europe's institutions. Because what is here is really a challenge, not only to Ukraine, and I think it's important to emphasize that the Ukrainian population at the moment is taking the brunt of this. It is unimaginable suffering which is happening there, the shelling of civilians. This is something which has to stop. But it also is a challenge to the security architecture of Europe. It is a challenge to Europe's way of life, to our values, to our interests, and to our principles. And that means the response to this is going to be a strong response, and that is exactly what we've seen. What it has also emphasized for Europeans is that the security architecture which is there still matters. NATO continues to matter. The transatlantic relationship continues to matter. And I think the visit of Biden has re-emphasized that for Europe, that is the important hard security aspect, which always is at the forefront. I think we will end up having a new look at all policies across the whole range, not just foreign policy, security policy, but we will have to look at energy policy, we have to look at refugee migration policy, at agricultural policy, at industrial policy, at economic governance, at fiscal policy. It is a very, very wide-ranging impact on policies. But I think in the end, what this has also shown as not an intended effect, but I think what has become very clear is that if Europe acts together, it still has a considerable weight, it has considerable leverage in global affairs. So what does that mean for the foreseeable future? I think from a European perspective, certainly nobody wanted this war. And if there's a possibility to stop it, then that would be very welcome. But clearly this will have to depend on Ukraine. It will be down to Ukraine to agree with Russia what a ceasefire or a peace deal might look like. As long as there is no such ceasefire or peace deal, the European Union is going to continue to support Ukraine, including with the weapons which have been exported to Ukraine in this war. I think what there is in terms of the international expectation, certainly there's no wish of NATO or the European Union to escalate this into a direct conflict with Russia, a direct military conflict with Russia, given the consequences that would have. But that also means that Russia has to refrain from threatening with nuclear weapons, threatening with biological weapons or chemical weapons. This is very important that these lines are not crossed at any point in this. And I would expect that also the pressure from the international community, including from China, will be very clear that this is not an escalation which could ever be contemplated by anyone. I think the longer term question really is, what impact does this have on EU-China relations? And there it will very much depend from a European perspective on what steps China takes in this war, whether it does end up being neutral, trying to broker some form of peace, or whether it will side with Russia in this. Russia has made it clear that it would like direct military support also from China. If that happens, it's going to be seen very negatively from the European Union, and it will have a very negative impact on EU-China relations also in the long run. So it very much depends, I think, on what kind of messages now come out of Beijing. That will determine how the European Union reacts, and that's why I think the EU-China summit is very important to also see what kind of discussions are there. And just to reiterate, and I'll finish on that, the point I made at the beginning, that this is a watershed moment. So everything which is going to happen from now on is going to be seen through the lens of what does that mean in terms of this geostrategic, geopolitical situation. So the EU-China relationship is also going to be measured within that context.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Fabian. And yeah, I think you are right. You are talking about this watershed moment that really is going on. And but over the past weekend, we see President Biden made a very strong speech in Warsaw. Basically, he was talking about Putin cannot remain in power. I mean, that's a very strong message. So we probably don't see that the European get more strategically independent, but more so now tied with the US, and the US is actually pushing for probably more confrontation with Russia. So that will be a little risky as well. So what do you think about what are the European proposals, particularly from the think tank, how this can be done, like through the shuttle diplomacy, or maybe talks in Turkey or UN, whatever. So maybe just a follow-up question for Fabian. What do you think? What can we do to de-escalate? That's really the topic of today.
I mean, just to say on Biden, I don't think he's pushing for wider confrontation. I think it's very clear that the US is not willing to get into a military confrontation with Russia, and neither is the EU. So this, I think, is very important because we want to enter these discussions in the right way. I think there are a number of proposals on the table of what a future could look like. But I think what is very important from a European perspective is that we cannot and we should not have these discussions without involving Ukraine. It is very crucial that in the current situation, given also the immense suffering Ukrainian people have endured, that it is clear that Ukraine has to be the one which actually finds whatever ceasefire proposals, whatever peace proposals are on the table acceptable. And as far as I can see at the moment, there still is a very big gap between what Moscow is demanding and what Ukraine is willing to accept. At the moment, the key question for me is the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Clearly, Kiev has stated that it is not willing to accept the Donbass or ceding Crimea, as long as Russia demands those kind of things. I don't think we will see a ceasefire. So I think what we have to see at the moment is how we manage the situation, how we also enable Ukraine to resist this war. A ceasefire can only come if there's a meeting of minds between Moscow and Kiev, and at the moment that's not there. I think there can be, and there have been discussions around, for example, what could this mean in terms of NATO membership? What could this mean in terms of EU membership? I think these are discussions which Europeans are willing to enter into. I think there's also the question of economic sanctions. If there was an agreement between Ukraine and Russia, I'm sure that economic sanctions would be part of that. I think Europe would be willing to also see a gradual lifting of economic sanctions if that is the case. But having said all that, just to add one more sentence, I think it's also important to recognize that in some ways things have been broken which cannot be fixed, at least not in the short term. So I think what we are going to see, regardless of what the outcome is on the ground, is that there is an economic decoupling between the European Union and China, and that the relationship is going to deteriorate both economically and politically, and that this is not going to be something which will be over anytime soon.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Fabian. Yeah, you sound so very, not very optimistic on the China-EU relation, but we hope that the China-EU summit will probably, clarify, have a better understanding of both sides on the relations of cooperation. I understand. But as China has always also said, China respect the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and Foreign Minister Wang Yi has said that in the first week at the Munich Security Conference. Now I'd like to hear Mr. Emmanuel. You marvel. You are in Moscow and a fellow from Carnegie Moscow Center. So what's your perspective there on how we can, what has come into today's crisis, and how can we get out of that? Yeah, Emma, please.
Thank you very much for having me. I want to start by saying that right now we're in the middle of process, and we're at a point in time where almost none predictions can be done. And it's really difficult to imagine what's going to happen next. But what at the same time we see right now is something that is irreversible. And I agree with Fabian that after the war in Ukraine has started on February 24th, many things have changed, and the world will not be the same again. Russia's position in the world also will not be same again. And we also don't really know what is the future of Russia going to be. We don't know what is the state of foreign relations going to look like. We don't even know what domestically Russia will look like. So saying all that, we still know that this conflict is not going to end very soon. As we talk right now, there are meetings in Turkey between Russian and Ukrainian sides. And of course, this is a step towards some kind of ending of this horrible events that are going on for more than a month right now in Ukraine. But I'm still pretty skeptical about the positive consequence of these negotiations, because at this point I don't see that none of the I see that none of the parties that are participate in this war have intentions to end it. If we put ourselves in the shoes of Ukrainian leadership, they just cannot give up. They just cannot say that they want to end it as it is right now. If we want to portray what is the thinking in the Kremlin, it will be the same. The Kremlin also doesn't want to stop it right now because there are no tangible kind of bonuses that the Kremlin can show to domestic audience and to international community that it's kind of gained out of this whole aggression. So I see that the situation right now is kind of stuck, and till Moscow, I mean, this is very cynical and very depressing, but till Moscow will reach some kind of tangible bonuses from its actions in Ukraine that it can portray to the domestic audience as something that it gained out of this horrible event, it will not stop. So saying all that, I don't want to overestimate the level of other parties that might have some kind of effect on the situation on the ground. Of course, they can play a role of mediator, like Turkey right now, like some European countries. But other than that, I don't see that there is much influence in any country over, thinking in Moscow. Moscow will not be listening to the opinions of its partners, of its allies in any country, because at this point Russia has gone too far and so much has been sacrificed. So many sanctions has been put on Russia that its economy is going to face real, maybe even depression or something like that. So Russia will not just end it as it is at this moment. And at the very beginning, you said that what think tanks and what experts can say or how we can change the situation. I also wouldn't overestimate the level of influence that we and our colleagues have over the thinking in Russia, because for the last several years, all experts and the majority of people from the expert community has been saying that the war is not instrument in solving conflicts. It will just deteriorate the situation. It's not the way out. But we are at this point where the actual aggression from Russian side has started in Ukraine. And even though all of the experts were against it, it still is happening. So yeah, also not positive comment from me, but this is, I'm afraid, is reality.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. You sound more pessimistic. I think it's that both sides has gone so deep now, and it looks like reached the point of no return, and it's really sad to see that. But whatever as the international community, probably we still need to promoting the peace and talks and try to solve the crisis. Now I'd like to hear what Ra. I mean, you're based in Italy, right? I mean, you also ISPI is a very important think tank in Italy. So what's your perspective when you look at this from Italian point of view at Italy's think tank?
First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very honored to be here with you. I share Fabienne's and Temur's hopeful skepticism. Hopeful because we must keep looking for a diplomatic solution, and we must look at all occasions for dialogue between Ukraine as important events. But at the same time, we cannot harbor many hopes for these talks to bear concrete results. And this is the case with today's meeting in Istanbul as well. From the Italian perspective, this war bears very important and very dire consequences because, as you know, Italy is quite dependent on Russian gas, and it has always played a mediator role between Moscow and Brussels. So I'd like to make 3 points on the consequences that this conflict has for my country. The first is the political consequences, and also what Italy is actively doing to help Ukraine in this context. First, I was mentioning the role of a bridge that Italy has played with regards to Russia. Italy has always boasted a very positive relationship with Moscow based on the economic, political, and cultural ties. This is changing. This has started to change when Mario Draghi came to power, and Draghi has shown a much more direct confrontational also approach vis-a-vis Moscow, and is now restating Italy's position in terms of politics with the European and NATO allies. So at the start of the conflict and even before, in December, Vladimir Putin has asked directly to Mario Draghi to intervene as a mediator in this crisis. But the role of Italy in this context has always been more low profile compared to France or Germany's leaders who played a much more active role in the mediation. And that Mario Draghi has stated his complete support to sanctions. He has freezed 800 million worth asset belonging to Russian oligarchs in Italy, and he's willing to go very far when it comes to sanctions. So he's stated that no veto will be imposed by Italy, even if harsher sanctions, also targeting Russian oil and gas sector, will be imposed. But of course, talking about energy, we must also look at the economic consequences of this war, and the increase in the energy prices in Italy is already starting to cause upset in the country, and the economic lobbies are actually opposing sanctions. There's always been a very active anti-sanctions lobby, especially in Lombardy or in the wealthy northeast of the country, where most companies that do business also with Russia are concentrated. So this is causing some political trouble. And the third important consequence that this conflict is having on Italy is a humanitarian one, because Italy has the second largest Ukrainian community in Europe. So we're talking about 250,000 Ukrainian living in Italy before the conflict. This number is obviously rising, skyrocketing after the conflict, because refugees come to my country because, of course, they have family ties and personal contacts that they can rely on. So we're experiencing a humanitarian, I wouldn't say crisis, but certainly it's a situation that is causing some political troubles in Italy. And we have also started to see this problem politicized by the political opposition in the government. So to look at the the possible ways out of this conflict, I very much agree with Fabian. This is not something that is in the hands of European countries. We, of course, are keen to facilitate the talks between Russia and Ukraine, but ultimately this is up to Ukraine and to Russia especially to look for a compromise that is sustainable, because we already had a ceasefire agreement. We had the 2 Minsk protocols that were not implemented, and it's not just because of Russia, but because of Ukraine not perceiving those agreements to be fair and to be sustainable. Hence, we must look for a solution that could be accepted by both countries and implemented by the both of them. So the problem here is really to look for a compromise that Ukraine doesn't perceive as too negative for its statehood and its sovereignty. But my fear is that Russia is looking precisely to that type of agreement that reduces Ukraine's sovereignty. So what is Europe doing at the moment with sanctions and with military aid to Ukraine is precisely this: empowering Ukraine not to be too vulnerable and not to accept a compromise that would eventually lead to a reduction of its sovereignty.
Great. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, no, I think you've been, described quite well from Italian's perspective, and you think that this needs to be resolved between Ukraine and Russian, and cannot be totally solved by Europeans. But again, I had a feeling that if 2 guys are fighting, I mean, if you ask them to sit down and talk, they are already fighting. Probably we need third parties. We need, other people, countries to come in to help, and particularly European countries. And that's why we see the French president is so active. Emmanuel Macron is talking to President Putin and to President Xi, and of course to Biden, and so very actively pursuing that. And I know JC Barr, you based in Paris, and you are French, and but also you know Russian quite well. You used to have a think tank, Dialogue of Civilization, which has office in Berlin and Moscow, and so you know both sides quite well. So what's your take? And as a French, now you're having a French think tank. What are the roles we can play at think tank, and recommendation we can give in solving this crisis? What's next? JC, please.
Thank you, Henry. Good to see you and colleagues, and thanks for the invitation. I think this is a very meaningful initiative to bring us all together. We certainly need more of those sort of global conversation, and probably one of the reason why we have reached this sort of tragedy is that after years or 2 or 3 years of no direct interaction among people, among leaders, this has probably been one of the reasons why the relationships have been somewhat very different. And I'd like also to, join what Timur just said before. I think it's almost impossible to make any solid or serious prediction. I think that probably none of us would have thought 2 months ago the situation where we are today, and probably it's very difficult to know where we will be in 1 or 2 months' time. This being said, we should not, prevent ourselves to comment. And you mentioned, of course, the effort of President Macron, and I speak here from not just from a French perspective. And as you said, I've been during 2 or 3 years working very closely with Dr. Yakunin in the Dialogue of Civilization Institute, and our goal and objective was really to create some sort of a global platform for dialogue and a way to try to define some sort of a global viewpoints, and or at least to agree on how to disagree. And evidently this was coming probably too early. There was probably some sort of a denial, at least from, let's say, a Western perspective about the reality of the new world that was in the making. But this is maybe something we can discuss later on. I'd like maybe just in 2 or 3 minutes, to look at the situation where we are now 35 days after the start of the conflict. And I think what really characterized this, the operation or the military situation in the battlefield, but trying to go a little bit beyond, or what are the first takeaway or the first lessons from this situation. And I think we see a situation that is extremely contrasted, or let's say a situation where we can see the situation with the bottle that is half empty or the bottle that is half full, from wherever we stand, from depending on where we stand. And I fully agree with everything that Fabian said before about some sort of a new momentum for Europe. And it's amazing to see that in just a couple of weeks, thanks to, if I can say, thanks to this invasion of Ukraine, Europe or the EU has made more progress than in decades of discussion and negotiation. This is a bit ironic. And you have mentioned President Macron's effort or the call, to promote European security and defense. And until very recently, and when he presented his plan for his EU presidency, he made a very strong point about security and defense for Europe. And there was very, very little support at that time. And when we see now, in just a few days after the conflict, the decision of Germany to increase significantly its defense budget, the way the EU has been allocated €500 million euro for supporting Ukraine with armament. I mean, this is something that would have been just inconceivable just a few years ago. And again, it's a bit ironic to see that this succession of crises, if we take the COVID and if you take the war in Ukraine, have been in a way immensely boosting the EU with the decision of the EU recovery plan and so on and so forth. I don't want to be too long in that, but I think it's this is one important phenomenon, or this is one important step, is that evidently the EU, which was extremely reluctant, or at least many countries which were very reluctant to become a power, a global power, I think there is a new mindset and a real willingness and also awareness that it has to play this global role. And it's interesting to see that what is called the strategic compass, which is sort of the new international policy for the strategic policy for the EU internationally, which was again presented or tabled by the international or the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Borrell of the EU, has been adopted just in a few days' time. It's interesting to see also that even this crisis is producing miracles. To realize that this week, it was mentioned before, there are discussions in Turkey, and that there is a joint diplomatic initiative with Turkey and Greece. Again, this would have been totally inconceivable that Greece and Turkey would have been developing a joint initiative. So in that respect, the war in Ukraine and Putin's invasion have been a sort of a wake-up call for the Western world, but particularly also for Europe, and that it has also garnered some support internationally, of course, with the EU, with the UN resolution. So that's, if we look at the glass half full from a Western perspective. But I think, there is, and that's why I said it's extremely contrasted, because if you look at a different perspective, in reality, the Western world is extremely, or at least that's the way I see it, extremely lonely. It's a war on narrative. It was presented, it was said that the UN resolution was a big success for those who were supporting Ukraine, because 141 countries adopted this resolution. But if you look in reality, in terms of world population, you have 55% of the world population that is not supporting the UN resolution. So you have a large number of countries, but in terms of world population, it's very different. If you take the BRICS, which is in a way the expression or the, let's say, the symbol of the emerging world, you have 5 countries in the BRICS. You have only one that supported the UN resolution, one, of course, that opposed, which is Russia, and 3 countries, China, India, and South Africa, that abstained. So I think, this shows that what is portrayed or presented here in the Western media as a large success from the international community to condemn the invasion of and the war in Ukraine, the situation is not so clear. And I think we can say that, in a way, this war in Ukraine shows that the emerging shows some sort of an emerging post-Western world. And I think this is something that we will have to look very carefully. So this is, in a way, I think we should have this in mind, because it shows that there will be no, in a way, there is no winner, but only losers. And that for now, it's a sort of a zero-sum game. And this being said, I think the time has really, of course, it was said before, the role of China is absolutely decisive. This is maybe something that we can discuss now in further details. But also, I think the time has come to call some sort of there was a Bretton Woods moment after World War II. And I think the time has come for, of course, let's call it differently, not the Bretton Woods, but some sort of a new moment where finally all parties, I mean, the old world and the emerging world, or again, whatever you call it, decide to sit at the table and to say and to discuss, what is it that we want to do together to keep and to maintain a stable, a peaceful, and a prosperous world. Because after all, this is what we all want. But in a way, the Western world has been very much in denial of a new reality. And I think, as we always say, never waste a crisis. And if at least this terrible tragedy can help to build awareness and to be a wake-up call, and to decide that we should finally open the discussion and say, okay, what is it that we want all together to do to create a sustainable and peaceful and prosperous world?
Okay, great. Thank you, JC. And you're right. As also Fabian mentioned as well, this is a historical moment, and then probably a watershed moment, and the global governance, global structure will be changed forever. And so probably I can discuss a bit about China think tank perspective. For example, I think for this war there is a we are living on a planet. Everybody is affected, and China is the largest trading nation with both Ukraine and Russian. And you know, China's energy, 73% depends on the import. And this crisis drive up the energy crisis, energy prices as well, and that's going to cost China billions and the billions, probably 500 billion more to import. And also, Ukraine and Russia accounts about 25% of global grain production export. China again is the largest grain importing country, and you know, that means again a lot of destruction to the Chinese economy. And also, China now has, you know, with European and with U.S. a large, you know, those large trading nations, the percentage of China trading with Russian is probably accounts, you know, 1 to 15, 1 to 10 to 15 in terms of scale with China trading with West. So there's a huge interest for China to see this war coming to the end. And also, furthermore, China has a big trade interest with European countries. We see the China-EU European railway shipment has gone up, you know, 100% in the last several years. I mean, now with this war going on, we may have actually the stoppment of the you know the China-European railway now will be affected. Directly affecting China's export, so import as export. So see, there's a lot of things that China has no interest to, you know, to see this war continue. Really like to see it stopped, of course. And of course, again, that China is the largest trading nation with 130 countries, and China wants the world economy to go further. And one actual aspect is that one of the lessons, I don't know if we learn from this war, is that we see that, you know, this could be some Chinese perspective, is that we see that, you know, military and secure alliance doesn't really, you know, work to that well. I agree with JC talk about Bretton Woods moment. You know, in 1944, when we had the Bretton Woods moment, then we had the, you know, United Nations, World Bank, IMF, WTO. All those has really promoted the global trade and investment and prosperity. But now, recent number of years, we see the military alliance is really accelerated. We had NATO, of course, expansion. We had Five Eyes. We had AUKUS, you know, on a nuclear submarine between UK, Australia, and US, probably aimed at China. And we had the Quad at the, you know, a secure alliance again, mini NATO in Asia. So that kind of accelerate, you know, may not be really helpful. Where I think this Ukraine war is really probably a reminder of this military alliance may not really work. But on the contrary, I think that the China is pursuing is also very probably helpful, is that we pursue economic alliance. Like we set up AIB, we launched the Belt and Road initiative, focus on the infrastructure, you know, and then we have joined the RCEP, the largest free trade agreement in the world, where China is also trying to join CPTPP. And also China is applying a DPA, and China is trying to sign this CAI with investment treaty with EU. And also China has this FOCA with African countries. So all those economic alliance probably is really going to reflect in the future global you know, governance, is that is really, if we intertwine, if we can more get together, we probably can prevent future war. That's probably very important. So I'm glad to see that now on the infrastructure, there's a consensus now. President Biden launched this B3W, Build Back Better World, and the you know, European president announced the EU gateway, you know, 300 billion investment. So that really something probably we should do. But I want to conclude that maybe let's say how we can get things out of this. I think when President Xi talked to President Biden, President Xi said, you know, China and the US are two largest economy in the world. We have a responsibility for the world economy to revive, and also we are the two member of you know, Security Council of UN. And UN Charter should be upheld. So can we do something with UN? I mean, I didn't see any UN Secretary General or UN party were invited to the weekend meeting in Brussels. There's 3 summits there. Can't we just maybe come back to the UN with the Secretary General and all the P5 members and heads of state probably, and including EU and Ukraine? Can we have a 7-party talks on that? I mean, there used to be 6-party talks. China was actually involved. Can we have a 7-party talks? And let's have an immediate ceasefire, and then talk about the peace plan, how to gradually resolve that. Because I see now that 80% of the demand has been met already. Now Zelensky said, no, we are not joining NATO, and Ukraine likes to be neutral. And that was the main key demand for Moscow, really, to start with. And NATO says we're not admitting Ukraine to the NATO anymore. So that's probably solved 80% of the crisis. So can we have something with UN to really solve this? I mean, let's have a 7-party talks, and let's propose some practical recommendations. What do you think? I mean, we start again. We have another half hour left. Maybe Fabian, I will start with you because you are the president of a think tank in Europe. And what do you think about we can make some concrete proposals?
I mean, I think firstly, it is important from a European perspective. I would say that the alliances which are there are seen very differently now than they were 5 weeks ago. So from a European perspective, NATO does work. And certainly when you go to those countries directly in the front line with Russia, there's a clear perception that for those countries, their security is only guaranteed because NATO is in place. So we cannot distract from the fact that the cause of this war has not been expansion of NATO. It has not been that in some way Russia was treated badly by the West. The cause of this war, it's a war of aggression where Russia has chosen to question the whole security architecture of Europe and is directly challenging that architecture. So whatever solution is on the table cannot be something which is aimed at compromising or appeasing Russia. It has to be something which is clearly reflecting who the aggressor was in this case and what that has meant for Ukraine. So it, in the end, comes back to the question of what is acceptable to Ukraine. And whether Ukraine will insist on NATO membership or not, I think this is an area where Zelensky has said there's some room for maneuver. But it will still be the case that Ukraine will look for security guarantees, and it will also look for its territorial integrity. So if we are to have some form of peace conference, I think the, if you like, ground rules have to be very clear. That this cannot be the question of some kind of bargain whereby Russia then keeps the territories it has conquered by force. But it has to be something which aims at a longer term solution, which guarantees the integrity of Ukraine and the security of Ukraine. So I think there is room to have these talks as long as Ukraine is directly involved and is making the choices. But I think it also has to be very clear that there are limits to what can be given away and what is acceptable. And I think in the end, we are talking about something which has disrupted economies. It has had a terrible impact, especially on the Ukrainian population. And that will continue to be the case. So we cannot, in my view, go back to where we were before this conflict. We can try to manage the aftermath of it. We can try to manage the impact. That also means, and I think this is also something where I would look to the international community, is to have consideration of how can we help those who are most vulnerable, who are being affected by this. So what can we do in terms of the reconstruction of Ukraine? What can we do in terms of the negative impact of this conflict on inflation, on energy prices, but also, and I think this is a big role for the international community, is to deal with the food price increases, to deal with the impact this will have on some of the developing nations around the world. And there, I think much more can be done, and it's something which can be done in collaboration. But I'm coming back to what I said in my opening remarks. I think what has to be clear here is that what Russia has chosen to do, or what Vladimir Putin has chosen to do, is not acceptable, cannot be acceptable. And it cannot lead to a situation where Russia gains something from starting a war of aggression, putting the civilian population under shelling, doing all the things which has been happening in the last 5 weeks. That cannot lead to a situation where Russia then gains territory and question the choice of a country to be part of the European Union, to be part of the security architecture. I think we have to be very clear here that we will not find a sustainable solution if we ignore those issues. It has to be very clear about what has happened and what the consequences have to be of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Fabian. Yeah, no, absolutely, you're right. I mean, the territorial sovereignty and integrity of Ukraine must be respected. That's a very international public consensus, including China. So I think that if the integrity and territorial integrity and the sovereignty of Ukraine maintained. And now Zelensky said, okay, Ukraine can be probably neutral, and we may not be interested in joining NATO anymore, and NATO is not really interested at meeting Ukraine anymore. Probably, I don't know. I mean, a large chunk of the dispute has already been settled, probably. So, but then again, if you expect them talking by themselves, just two fighting people in the street, if you want to say, okay, you guys don't fight. They probably, can you talk? They probably won't talk. They will continue to fight. So there is a possibility that we need international community, particularly UN, to really gather, those two parties together and have all the other witnesses, solve this issue and give each other a graceful way out of this that respect both sides' interests. So that's something. I think probably we can calm down the situation and then gradually talk about withdraw the troops and lift the sanctions and things like that. So we're just talking, have some think tank proposal. But what about
sorry, could I just one thing? I think because it's just important. Absolutely, I'm fully for these kind of negotiations. But just to say, I think it has to be clear that Russia does not accept the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and that Russia has annexed already Crimea and is in the process, it seems, of annexing the Donbass. So as long as Russia, as you said, this is an international agreement that this should be the starting point. But for the moment, it looks like that Russia doesn't accept that starting point. And that makes it very difficult to have these kind of negotiations.
Yeah, no, I think that definitely, this new independent state that Russia claimed that still, I'm sure there will be discussion. But then, as far as Crimea is concerned, that was almost happened 8 years ago. Even China doesn't recognize that. So I think let's really see how we can build up the status quo, and then really to come back to the pre-war situation. I mean, that probably is still a possibility if we, taking care of both sides may demand on that. What do you think of Tamar? You are based in Moscow. You are more on the ground there to see that. So what's your solution to the crisis?
Yeah, I think
about the UN approach on this, yeah. second party talk.
Yeah. I think in the ideal world, what you've said would have worked when two parties are in the middle of fight. There is no other solution than to call other parties to become mediator between two parties. But this is only in the ideal picture, in ideal world. But we are living in a world when one of the parties, Russia, acts irrationally. There is no real, of course, if you take a look at the situation from the pure geopolitical point of view, this seems logical. Russia has been claiming its geopolitical interest for decades. No one listened, and here is the war. But if you take a look at this situation from rational point of view, you would see that Moscow acts irrational. The negative effect of its actions in Ukraine are horrible. All of the, actions that tens of millions have been put into development of Russia for the last 30 years are now completely diminished. Russian economy is being closed as it has never been before. We really don't know what is the real negative effect on Russia's economy. We don't know how the domestic population is going to react in several months when the economic situation will hit hard. We still don't know all of these, negative. We don't know what is the level of crisis that Russia is going to face for sure. And when Russia acts so irrationally, it's impossible to manage that Russia will be able to, come to any rational solution of the situation. It's gone so far in this direction that there is no way out of it. And no one, I want to highlight it, no one has any influence over thinking of Moscow right now, and I just think that this is what happens when too much power is concentrated in one hands, and when decision-making process is consolidated around very narrow circle of people, and at the same time when they have lack of expertise, and there is no real discussion about the steps towards this and that direction. This is what consequence of this situation might be. And of course, UN here seems to be as the only international organization that has to take this responsibility to solve this problem. But UN forever has been criticized for being unable to act in this kind of situation, because UN was created like that at the first place. It doesn't have real instrument to make big powers, nuclear powers, to act in a certain way. And when you are nuclear superpower as Russia, you really don't listen to what UN says to you. So this is again some negative comment from me. Sorry for being so pessimistic, but I think we should be realistic here.
Okay. Thank you, Temper, for your very pessimistic but also straight to talk. And I still think, with the pressure mounting and on both sides, Ukraine people are suffering. 3 million, 4 million people become refugees, flooded Europe, and they're going to feel the pressure as well. And then Russian, of course. When the sanction, when the sky is closed, when the SWIFT is forbidden to use, the consequences will continue also. So even though you said maybe they have become irrational, but I think that's probably even more so. We need the international community to come in, like a Chinese president Xi said. China is willing to work with the international community to seek a diplomatic solution, and the UN Charter should be held uphold it as well. So I think UN was created after Second World War to prevent the major Third World War, and now we're at the brink of a Third World War. I think UN should be really strengthened. And also, as two guys are fighting, if all the major parties are involved, including Ukraine, maybe they felt there's no point to continue because it's too much cost and too much damage, and then maybe rationale will prevail. So let's hope. Let's try. That's basically. So what do you think of Inora? What's your view from Italy on this?
Well, I'm afraid I share Timur's pessimism when it comes to the UN's role. Both the organization facing problems with its effectiveness for many years, and in the specific saw the 2017 proposal by Russia to have a UN peacekeeping operation in Ukraine, and that failed. It failed even though there were actually some ceasefire agreements in place, so the big bulk of the diplomatic talks were already done, but it was so difficult to agree on the scope of the UN peacekeeping mission that in the end this proposal didn't see the light. So I don't believe the UN could play a very powerful role there. Also, we saw that there was an open condemnation by the General Assembly to Russia. So I'm sorry, but I don't see how the UN could play a meaningful role. But this is also why many European countries and the European Union as a whole is seen as partial in this conflict, because there was an open condemnation of Russian actions. Hence, it is more difficult for individual European states or Brussels to be perceived by Moscow as a credible mediator. It would always be perceived as a party siding with Ukraine. In this context, I believe probably bilateral diplomacy made by Turkey or China would be more effective, because these countries have shown a willingness to strike a balance between their support to Ukraine's sovereignty. Both Beijing and Istanbul and Ankara are defending the right of Ukraine to remain a sovereign state and its territorial integrity. But at the same time, they have very good relationship with Moscow based on economy and politics. So these countries have a more balanced approach that in the eyes of Moscow could be, I think, could make them a much more credible mediator in the conflict. So I would say bilateral diplomacy, and especially bolstering the role of Ankara and Beijing could be the way forward.
Thank you, Inora. And yeah, and JC, what do you think? I mean, I see French President, Emmanuel Macron is the president of European Council, is the rotating chair for this half year, and he's busy talking with President Putin. He even visited Moscow before the crisis, and then he's talking to President Xi twice already in the last 2 months, and he's talking to Biden, talking to all the other leaders. So can he and the UN Secretary General, I mean, for example, Guterres, chair heads of state meeting, and then probably talk immediate ceasefire, and then let the parties involved to solve that, because I think it's really we cannot leave this as Emmanuel also said, leave the two sides to talk. We may need some international convention, but then French, I think, played quite a big role there, and also French is the president of the European Council for the time being, and so UN plus head of state, can we have a immediate ceasefire, and then later on let's have a multi-party talks to address all the specific issues. So what do you think about this approach that, we need to come to some kind of recommendations, actually? Yeah. Jason, please.
Yeah, you mentioned the willingness or the determination of President Macron to keep the line open with Putin, and I think today they are speaking again, and this is their ninth call or communication since the beginning of the war. So it means that indeed the line is still open. Does it have an impact? I don't think that any of us really knows. At least it's interesting to see that Putin is still willing to speak with Macron, not as a French president, but as mostly as the EU president of the Council. What is he expecting from these talks? I don't know. I'm not in his mind, but it means that the diplomatic channels are still. To what extent they are effective, that's another question. And maybe I spent too many years with the UN, to share your optimism about the UN role in that conflict. Of course, the UN could or should play a role, but maybe in a very different way. We need to think in a very creative way. And getting back to what Fabian said before, evidently, we cannot compromise. There is an aggressor, there is an aggression, and we cannot compromise in terms of territory. It would be ironic to say you have lost the battle, but we allow you to expand your territory. That's, of course, something that's, is the situation for now. But then we will not make any progress, and we will have the war continuing during months and months. And this is probably not what we want, and this is probably not what is acceptable. And I have the conviction, and I'm fully with Eleanor. I think those who can speak with President Putin today are those who he trusts, those who he considers as his peers or like-minded. And I think there has been a profound breach in trust and even in respect in Putin's mind vis-à-vis the West, vis-à-vis the US president, vis-à-vis the EU leadership, and probably, and also because I think they have done the job as much as they could. They have shown that they are determined, that they are really willing to sideline Russia and President Putin as much as possible. So he knows what is now the limit. But I think if tomorrow, and Laura mentioned China and Turkey, I would also add India, because India has been for now very much silent or prudent. And that was a major blow, because the Americans were certainly not expecting that India would abstain in the UN resolution. And it was very badly seen, because as you mentioned before, all those attempts, from the US to build or to rebuild new alliances in Asia and East Asia, suddenly they realized that on this major issue, India has been deciding for many reasons, and also because of long-term relationship with Russia, that they would not, vote this resolution. So I sort of think that, is it a joint initiative? Is it something very informal, where they would speak from mano a mano, not diplomatic talks, and where there has to be a loser or a winner, where you feel that if you make any compromise, you are losing face. What I think is needed is talks under the radar in a very informal setting. That's why I mentioned before, this Bretton Woods moment. Why is it that Bretton Woods was so successful? It was in a remote area where people were just wearing shirts, but they were really in charge of building a world that would be sustainable and peaceful without having to make a votation with the winners, the losers, the majority or the minority. What I think is needed is really the mano a mano, where President Xi can speak with Putin and say, listen, we are building a crazy world, or you are building a world that will be a total chaos. Is that really what we want? And I think if Prime Minister Modi, if President Erdogan are doing the same way, I think, or I believe, or I hope that Putin, and again, I mean, none of us knows his really psychological or psychiatric state of mind, because this is a big question mark, none of us really knows exactly, because I mean, there were lots of speculation that he has lost ground with reality, or I don't know, but if people or men that he profoundly is a respect or also fears, like President of China, India, and Turkey would speak with him, I think this would make a big difference. And also because he would know that there would be no compromise at all from the West, and that he would feel that he would be totally isolated from the West and from the emerging South perspective.
Yeah, I think, you have a very stimulating thought there. I think that we cannot really probably push him to the corner. Excuse me, because we have this, we are in the nuclear stage. I mean, he is putting his nuclear on alert. That actually stimulating us. I mean, can we have, of course, these BRICS countries, probably can, like India you mentioned, South Africa could probably play some friendly role as well. And then we have G20 coming up in Indonesia this year. And again, Putin is said he wants to attend, but even though President Biden said he wants to expel him, but I don't think he's get many members' support on that. So we still need to talk to him, to really calm him down and really let him find a graceful way to get out of this, probably. And also, I don't know. I mean, we have G7 had a meeting. Maybe can we have a G10? G7 plus China, India, and Russia, and then talk about these issues. So the Athens that we need to talk together, and the French president is a good example. He talked, as you said, 9 times now to Putin. So we have to really try all those peaceful means, and international community really have to work together to solve this crisis. We can't just let this floating and deteriorating and in downward spiral. So again, I mean, we are almost out of time, and
if you allow me, Henry, if you allow me, just half a minute. The BRICS, as we all know, had some difficulties in the last few years, really to concretize or really to be seen as a major force. I mean, it was some sort of an exciting concept about 10 to 15 years ago, but it has never really materialized as a real entity on the global stage. And maybe this is a unique moment in time. If there were a BRICS initiative to try to broker some sort of an agreement or a peace process, that would be for the BRICS altogether. Maybe it's totally naive, but this would be a great opportunity for the BRICS to become a major player on the global stage. And as you said, having maybe a joint at some point, to confirm or to a disagreement with a joint meeting of the BRICS and the G7. And I think it would be smart on both sides, to to express their willingness to, to say, okay, this is now the end of the conflict, but also a way for the G7 and the West to acknowledge that it is really willing to engage with the emerging South. And this will not just be a power game with an hegemon that doesn't want to lose its hegemony.
Yeah, that's right. Let's try all the venues and mechanism, the BRICS summit and the G20 summit, and then China-EU summit, and then we have, also G10 concept or whatever, So of course UN. Absolutely, permanent 5-member countries, and plus EU and Ukraine, 7 parties altogether. So there's quite a few venues probably we could consider, and then try to promote these peace talks with the international community. So maybe last word, maybe 1.5 minute, 30 seconds, Fabienne and the other 2 that haven't spoke so far for the last round. Yes, Fabienne, please.
Yes, I'll be very brief given the timing, but just I think what has been said, I just wanted to bring it back to the role of China. And I think it is really important that China does use its power and influence with Moscow as much as possible. One, to emphasize this question of non-use of nuclear weapons, non-use of chemical weapons. I think that has to be very clear. Secondly, I think it's important that there is no direct military support for Russia, because that would inflame the conflict further. And I think there should be real pressure on Putin to cease and desist what is happening in Ukraine, in particular, also the shelling of civilians. And finally, I think there has to be this clear message that the territorial integrity of Ukraine has to be the outcome of this in the end. So I think China can play a big role in helping Moscow to reconsider what it can get out of this war and how we best end it.
Okay, Tamara, yes.
I would just, I don't have any kind of suggestions or something that might help to end this crisis, because I do believe that the end of this crisis is in hands of Moscow in the first place. But I would say that it's important for expert community to really keep our eyes open on the issues that are going on right now, on the reasons for why did this happen, because all of this knowledge will be very important when we will come to a point where the new security system and the new international order will be starting to get designed.
Okay, great. Okay, we have Eleonora. Yeah, please.
I'd like to make 2 final points. First is the system of guarantors. Italy has stepped up and declared its willingness to act as a guarantor for Ukraine in case an agreement is reached. Together with Italy, we have many other countries that agreed to take responsibility and ownership of this crisis, also from this perspective. And I think that this system keeps being great. It was historically important and keeps being very relevant today. Second, it's more of a point for the European Union, something that I have been advocating for. We have, of course, a strategy of maximum pressure on Moscow through the sanctions, through the military help to Ukraine. But at the same time, we should be careful not to alienate the Russian people. And it's a long-term perspective that we have to adopt here. Russia is our neighbor for good. And the Russian people Of course, there is a big debate at the moment if they share, if they support this war, but at the same time, we must not forget about the people in Russia that are opposing this war and are facing very dire consequences for speaking their minds against the war. So the EU should have a strategy to reach out to them and not to lose the Russian people for good.
Great. I think probably we're really running out of time because we started a few minutes late. We not conclude a few minutes late, but I think we had a very good, excellent discussion, very stimulating and constructive. And so we have a think tank from Brussels, from Moscow, from Rome, from France, from China, of course, from all share our perspectives, and we had very good. Productive discussion and then explored many proposals and discussion. And I think that multilateralism is the way to go. Absolutely. We see that. So even to solving this crisis, we have to really work collectively, international community. We mentioned about UN. This is always the organization that's been safeguarding the world peace at large, since 1945. So we have to continue to uphold that, but also we can explore the European Council, the BRICS and the G20 and China-EU summit and even probably G10 special meeting on this crisis. So that's really working out all the and the 7-party talks, whatever. So I think we had a very good discussion, and I think that it'd be very stimulating to us, and we hope that we keep this kind of a dialogue at the think tank level so that we can really make more recommendation proposals to our public policy makers, and then so that we have contribute our best. So once again, on behalf of the Center for China and Globalization, I want to thank you all very much and for this very timely and constructive dialogue. Thank you very much for all our think tank friends. Thank you. Okay, goodbye. Also, I want to thank our audience online. We have carried this live on our social media. I'm sure many viewers also watched us, and thank you very much also.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Very much. Bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.